ready for a mystery that smells like jasmine and danger. Before we dive into the dusty secrets of a decades-old disappearance, I need you to do one thing. Hit that like button. Seriously, every click helps this channel find more people who love deep, layered stories just like this one. Now, dim the lights, settle in, and let the scent guide you. It was the dust, initially, that drew me in. Not the dry, acrid kind that makes you sneeze, but the old, settled velvet dust of things left untouched for 30 years. A deep, comforting layer of forgotten history in the attic of a closed estate. I was there, a graduate student with a penchant for the tangible past, sifting through the remains of a life belonging to someone named Lisa Berckley, a name that meant nothing to the world, but whose belongings whispered secrets. I found the box tucked under a chaise lounge draped in a moth-eaten tapestry. It wasn't the box itself that caught me. It was the scent. A rich, unforgettable, intoxicating mixture that clung to the aged wood and the yellowed paper. Jasmine, sandalwood, and something sharp, almost metallic, like high-stakes excitement or fear. I lifted the lid. Inside lay 24 letters, tied with a faded emerald ribbon. They were dated between 1984 and 1986. The last one was simply marked October 14th, 1986. The day Lisa Berckley vanished. The first letter was playful, a correspondence between two lovers, or maybe two adventurers. Lisa wrote in a flowing, elegant script, detailing a clandestine trip to the coast, mentioning codes and aliases, a life lived just outside the edges of convention. It was the handwriting of a woman utterly, dangerously alive. The scent, which I now realized was a specific, bespoke perfume she must have worn, a signature scent, was strongest on that last letter. I brought the box home, and for a week, my apartment smelled like a long-lost romance. I researched Lisa Berckley. She had been a minor poet, a bohemian figure in a wealthy New England town. She had a husband, a respectable doctor, and a son. Then, in the autumn of 1986, she drove her car to the train station, purchased a one-way ticket to Montreal, and was never seen again. No body, no note, just an empty parking space, and a persistent, unanswered question. Did she leave, or was she taken? The police had eventually ruled it a voluntary disappearance, a final poetic exit from a life she found too small. I didn't believe it. The letters felt like a tether, not a farewell. The scent, that phantom presence, felt like the real clue. It wasn't just perfume, it was an emotional signature. I became obsessed with isolating its components, spending hours at old perfumeries and archives, trying to find a match. This perfume wasn't mass-produced. It was custom blended, likely in a niche shop in Boston, or perhaps even Europe, a detail that spoke volumes about Lisa's cultivated, secretive lifestyle. It hinted at resources and connections far beyond the quiet life she was supposed to be living with her husband, the respectable Dr. Berckley. I had to find the source. Who was she writing to? The letters were addressed to L. The content was highly coded, full of literary allusions and references to meetings in obscure bookstores or beneath specific statues. One letter mentioned, "The third chime rings only for those who look up." Another spoke of the geometry of the broken harp. These were not casual notes, they were encrypted signals. The final letter, the one dated the day of her disappearance, was the most cryptic and the most potent. It read, L. The air is thick. I smell the jasmine, but I also smell the smoke. They know. I am choosing the only path left. If you receive this, know that the path leads to the house, but the key is not in the lock. Remember the promise. Remember the stars. Always. E. The house. That was my lead. Public records led me to the house she grew up in, the Berckley family estate, a crumbling Gothic revival structure perched dramatically on a bluff overlooking the Atlantic. It wasn't just old. It felt heavy, burdened by generations of secrets and the crushing weight of its own architecture. The granite walls were perpetually damp, covered in sea salt and clinging ivy. It felt like a stage set for a tragedy. I drove out on a gray, foggy Saturday, the box of letters secured on the passenger seat, the ghostly perfume riding on the stale air conditioning. The closer I got to the house, the stronger the metallic, fearful undercurrent of the scent seemed to become. The house was enormous, intimidating, and silent. Before I could even raise my hand to the heavy brass knocker, the door opened, seemingly anticipating my arrival. He was waiting. He was tall, lean, and possessed a severe handsomeness that was instantly unsettling. His dark hair was too long, styled by impatience rather than design, and his eyes were too intense, a startling clear gray that looked like storm clouds over the sea. He wore a heavy, dark-knit sweater that seemed to absorb the scant light. The air around him was tightly controlled, wound with an unspoken tension, like a cable about to snap. He was Lisa's grandson. I knew it instantly, not just from the generational resemblance to the few fading photographs I had found of Lisa, but from the slight, subtle trace of the same jasmine and sandalwood I'd smelled for a week, a memory of the scent. Or maybe he wore it too. It was a detail that instantly put me on guard, yet simultaneously drew me in. "You're on private property," he stated, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that matched the mood of the house. The sound was melodic, yet deeply reserved. "I'm Emma. I found these." I held up the box, the ribbon an improbable splash of color against the dreary day. "They belong to your grandmother, Lisa Berckley." His control broke. The intensity in his eyes flared, then immediately shuttered. It was a momentary glimpse into raw pain and a lifetime of unanswered questions. He didn't invite me in. He stepped onto the porch, his shadow falling across me, making me feel suddenly very small and vulnerable. "They are private family correspondence. Hand them over." His tone was not a request. It was a command issued from the weight of family obligation and buried grief. "I can't. This last one," I tapped the box, "suggests she didn't just leave. It suggests she was in danger and she left a clue. The coded text, the reference to smoke and they. I think the answer to what happened to her is here, in this house, or in these letters. And I believe I was meant to find them." His name was Rhys. He was a history professor, specializing in cryptology and lost documents, which explained his meticulous but guarded manner. The irony was heavy. He was an expert in solving secrets, yet he was surrounded by his own family's impenetrable enigma. He hated that I had the letters, yet he was utterly mesmerized by them, recognizing instantly their value as primary sources of a profound truth. I watched his face as he read the final one, his jaw tightening on the word, they. "We always knew she didn't just vanish for the sake of poetry," he murmured, stepping back inside and finally, reluctantly, gesturing for me to follow. He led me past a massive dark wood staircase, its railings carved into elaborate sea serpents. The family, pressured by the police and the need for normalcy, maintained the theory of the romantic escape. But my father, her son, knew better. He always said the house is full of absences. We've searched it for years. In the walls, under the floorboards, everywhere a desperate woman might hide a farewell or a plea. We found nothing. You, a stranger, bring me the missing piece." He led me into a cavernous study, filled floor to ceiling with books, volumes on everything from 19th century maritime law to obscure metaphysical texts. The air was thick with the smell of old leather, damp sea air, and the underlying persistent fragrance of Lisa's perfume, which was strongest here, near an empty mahogany desk. He sat opposite me at the heavy oak desk, his presence filling the room, radiating a powerful, coiled intensity. The scent around him was definitely the perfume, or a close iteration of it. It was profoundly distracting. an almost physical lure in the quiet of the study. "Tell me everything you have deduced, every association, every whisper you think you've heard," he said, leaning forward. His gray eyes locked on mine. He was assessing me, not just for my knowledge of the letters, but for my character, my capacity for obsession. And so, the investigation began in earnest. We spent the next month steeped in Lisa's life, the study becoming our confined, charged world. We worked late, fueled by stale coffee and the shared energy of the chase. I brought my academic rigor. Rhys brought his intimate, painful knowledge of the Berckley family mythology. We used the letters like a roadmap, cross-referencing her coded phrases with her published poems, her annotations in her favorite books, and the physical details of the house. The first breakthrough came with the phrase, "the geometry of the broken harp." After days of fruitless searching, I noticed a faded photograph tucked into an old guest book. Lisa standing in this very study, next to a decorative but broken antique musical instrument. "The harp," I exclaimed, pulling the old photo out. "The lines on the strings, the angles of the breaks. It's not a musical instrument, it's a coordinate grid." Rhys's breath hitched as he stared at the image. The intensity in his gaze was breathtaking. That harp was in the corner for years. My father smashed it when he was 10, distraught over his parents fighting. It's been gone since the 90s, replaced by that hideous tapestry. The broken strings mapped out sequences of numbers. These led us to 5 separate sources of literature scattered throughout the study and the library. Rilke's poetry, for emotional context. A first edition nautical guide, for spatial reference. A local history book, for place names. A leather-bound journal titled The Mariner's Log, for dates. And a rare, privately published book of cryptograms. We worked through the first layer of the code, the Rilke volume. The numbers pointed to lines that, when stitched together, read, "The smoke clears only when the keeper sleeps. Look for where the heart beats hardest beneath the stone of the lie." "The keeper," Rhys muttered, running a tired hand through his dark hair. "That has to be my grandfather, Dr. Berckley. He was a controlling, cold man, even before Lisa disappeared. He kept her under surveillance, I'm sure of it. He maintained the romantic escape narrative to protect his name. The possibility of his grandfather, a respected man of the community, being involved in something sinister, cast a cold shadow over the study. The thought of a murder, not an escape, hung heavy between us. It fed the tension, sharpening Rhys's edge, making him more volatile, yet more intensely focused on me as his anchor. The erotic tension between us was a palpable, dangerous fifth presence in the room. We were isolated, sharing Lisa's secrets and the intimate landscape of Rhys's grief. Late one night, after hours of staring at the coded messages, I reached across the desk for the local history book, and Rhys's hand shot out, covering mine, stopping me. "Wait," he said, his voice husky. His gray eyes were no longer analytical. They were dark, molten. "What is it?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. "You," he said, his gaze dropping to my mouth, then sweeping back up. "You smell like the answer. Like that blasted Jasmine, but alive, not dusty." "It's on the papers," I said faintly, but the lie was obvious. The scent was on his skin, emanating from his clothes. And I realized he wore the same, custom-blended perfume Lisa had worn. A final, devastating legacy. He leaned in, his proximity shattering the remaining professional space between us. I was acutely aware of the hard muscle of his arm resting next to mine, the heavy, persistent rhythm of his breathing. The air was charged, the scent of the sea storm outside blending with the deep, warm jasmine that was intrinsically Rhys. "You've broken every single wall I've built since I was a child," he whispered, his finger tracing the line of my jaw. "The letters, this house, this life, it's all been a cage. And you walk in, holding the key, and suddenly the walls don't matter." He kissed me then, not with the abrupt desperation of the first night, but with a slow, agonizing tenderness that felt like a deliberate choice, an act of profound vulnerability. It was a long, deep connection that tasted of salt and the lingering scent of that old coffee, anchored by the rich, complex perfume. His hands moved from my face to cut my neck, holding me steady as the world tilted. We stood there, lost in the silence, until he gently pulled back, his eyes searching mine. "We have to finish this," he murmured, his thumb stroking my cheek. "Yes," I agreed, though the word was difficult to form. The code, the murder, the mystery, it was all a blur. The only reality was the pulse of his hand on my skin. We didn't sleep that night, but we returned to the code, the tension now a current flowing between us, rather than a wall separating us. The next layer was the nautical guide, the numbers leading us to specific star charts. The stitched message from this book read, "The anchor is cast near the weeping stone. The heart beats true where the juniper grows wild." The weeping stone, Rhys realized, his finger tracking a point on a large old map of the Berckley property. "It's a natural sea arch, a geological formation near the cliff face. It looks like a figure weeping." We hiked out the next morning, the fog still thick, the ground slick with brine. We found the arch, and tucked inside a small tide-worn crevice, we found a small locked music box. It was heavy, made of bronze, and intricately carved with a geometric design that matched the pattern on the broken harp. "The key is not in the lock," I recalled from the last letter. "It must be a number combination, not a physical key." The combination was derived from the final 2 coded sources: the mariner's log, the 4 most frequent dates, and the cryptogram book, using the cipher derived from the broken harp. It took another 3 days of intense, frustrating work, our patience frayed, our intimacy a volatile comfort in the dark study. The second night, the exhaustion and the intense emotional connection became too much to ignore. We had been arguing over a sequence of numbers, the air thick with frustration, when Rhys simply stood, walked around the desk, and pulled me out of my chair. "I can't think anymore," he confessed, his voice heavy with defeat and desire. "I can only feel this." He pushed the books aside, clearing a small space on the heavy oak desk that had witnessed generations of Berckley family secrets. He lifted me onto it, placing me among the scattered papers, the old perfume, and the faint scent of despair. This time, the passion was deeper, a more complete surrender. He stripped away the last layers of my intellectual shield and his emotional armor with equal intensity. His hands were urgent, but precise, mapping the geography of my body as intimately as we had mapped the coast. The desk was cold beneath me, a contrast to the heat of his skin, his mouth, his relentless focus. The act was a conversation in which we finally spoke the full, unedited truth about our needs, our loneliness, and the immediate, overwhelming pull of our shared destiny. He didn't just seek pleasure. He sought connection, a grounding force against the chaos of his inherited grief. His movements were a slow, deliberate cadence, driving away the ghosts of the house, replacing the silence with shared, breathless sound. The jasmine scent was overwhelming now, saturating the space. No longer Lisa's memory, but the present, living essence of Rhys. Lying together afterward, his weight a comforting pressure. The truth felt less like a code to be cracked, and more like a simple, physical certainty. "My father," Rhys began, his voice rough, muffled against my hair. "He always demanded the truth, the violent truth. He needed proof she was taken, not that she left him. I found something when I was 15, years before the letter surfaced. It was a note, tucked into the spine of his own wedding album. It was her real final goodbye." "And you hid it?" "Worse. I read it, and then I burned it in the fireplace right here. It was devastating. It was not cryptic. It simply said she was leaving him and the life for good, choosing freedom over obligation. She knew he couldn't handle that. So I protected him and myself by burning the truth and feeding the murder myth. The truth about Lisa, I murmured, linking his confession to the mystery we were solving. She abandoned him, but she left the path just in case someone cared enough to follow it. She set up this elaborate code, a failsafe, a way to be remembered for the life she chose, not the one everyone assumed she fled. She was a poet, Emma. She needed the grand exit, even if it was silent. We finally cracked the music box code. Inside, resting on a velvet lining, was a small hand-drawn map of the island and a single polished piece of amber. The inscription inside the lid read, "The E is for everyone." The map was small, focused on a tiny rocky outcrop off the coast of Maine, known only to local fishermen and bird watchers, Juniper Island. The next morning, the storm had cleared, replaced by a brilliant, crystalline autumn day. Rhys and I stood on the porch, holding hands, the air crisp and clean. The house no longer felt like a grave, but a place of departure. "She chose the quiet, wild life," Rhys said, a genuine, unburdened smile finally gracing his face. "She didn't need the world to know. She only needed the one person who mattered, Elle, and anyone else tenacious enough, or foolish enough, to follow the breadcrumbs." She anchored herself. We took his small, sturdy boat, the Promise 2, a silent nod to his grandfather's boat, out that afternoon. The journey was long, the sea choppy but manageable. The island was desolate but stunning, covered in scrub and wild juniper bushes, the air fragrant with pine and salt. Near the highest point, sheltered from the fiercest winds, we found the remnants of a small hand-built cabin. It had been vacant for years, but everything was meticulously preserved, sealed against the elements. Inside, there was a tiny writing desk, a cot, and shelves full of books. The journal, the mariner's log, was here, its pages filled with years of entries, dates, weather, and poems, all written in Lisa Berckley's flowing hand. There was no grave. Instead, tucked into the wall above the desk, a copper plate was inscribed with 4 simple words. "Lisa Berckley, here I began." The scent was there, faintly, carried on the breeze, the jasmine and sandalwood, now mixed with the sharp, clean smell of the ocean and the wild juniper. It was the perfume of peace, the scent of the last card played in a thrilling, decades-long game. Rhys took my hand, his grip firm and warm, a promise in itself. She left the drama for the life, and she left us the key to both, the freedom to choose our own ending. "It wasn't just a key to her secret," I said, squeezing his hand, leaning my head against his shoulder. "It was a key to yours, too. The ability to let go of the loss and the lie." We stayed on the island until sunset, the amber stone resting in my palm, a warm talisman. We left the island, not with a body or a final letter, but with the certainty of a happy ending. Lisa's chosen one. And now, ours. We sailed back toward the light, the Berckley house visible on the distant bluff, no longer a symbol of loss, but of freedom, and the start of a story that belonged entirely to us. The scent of the sea, the old, beautiful jasmine perfume, and Rhys's strong, certain hand in mine forever mingled. Rhys and I never stopped searching for secrets, but we started doing it together. The scent of the last letter had finally led us home. If you love this story and want to hear more like it, please hit that subscribe button. It truly means the world to us and helps us grow. And hey, while you're at it, let's aim for 50 likes on this video. Help us smash that goal.